This 92-year-old veteran just received the most unexpected gift of his life. At 19 years old, James Carter climbed into a machine that he knew could either carry him home or never come back at all, and in that moment, surrounded by cold metal and the deafening roar of engines, he had no way of knowing that something inside that aircraft would stay with him for the rest of his life, because what he was about to experience wasn't just war, it was a bond. One that would disappear for nearly 70 years, before returning in a way no one thought was possible. The year was 1944, and the skies over Europe were filled with aircraft that looked powerful from a distance, yet felt incredibly fragile from the inside, especially when you were the one sitting in the cockpit, responsible for keeping it all together while everything around you was trying to tear it apart. James flew a B-17 Flying Fortress, a bomber built to endure damage that would destroy most aircraft, but resilience did not mean safety, and every mission carried the same unspoken understanding that something could go wrong at any moment, often without warning. And yet, what stayed with him most wasn't the danger. It was the feeling of the aircraft itself, the way the controls responded in his hands, the subtle vibration of the engines, the smell of heated oil that never quite went away. Pilots didn't just fly these machines. They learned them, they listened to them, and over time, they trusted them. But here's what most people don't realize. That connection didn't end when the war did. It couldn't, because when your life depends on something like that, it stops being just a machine and starts becoming something much harder to describe, almost like a second heartbeat. When the war ended, there were no ceremonies for the aircraft themselves, no final goodbye between pilot and machine. And for James, the transition back to civilian life happened quickly, almost abruptly, as if someone had closed a door on that entire chapter without giving him time to process it. And just like that, the aircraft was gone, not preserved, not honored, just gone. Scrapped, dismantled, or left to decay in places no one thought to look. And for decades, that was the end of the story. Or at least, that's what everyone believed. Because 70 years later, something surfaced, and at first, it didn't seem important at all. It was just an engine, old, weathered, incomplete, sitting in a storage yard, surrounded by other forgotten pieces of history. But there was one detail that didn't belong, a small set of numbers stamped into the metal, and those numbers told a story no one was expecting. When historians began tracing the serial code, they assumed it would lead to a familiar result. Another aircraft lost to time, another incomplete record, another dead end in a process that rarely produced anything extraordinary. But this time, it didn't. Because the deeper they looked, the more precise the trail became. Military logs, mission records, aircraft assignments. Everything started to line up, and then came the moment that changed everything. The engine wasn't just from any aircraft. It was from a B-17 that had flown missions in 1944, James Carter's aircraft. At first, even they didn't believe it, because finding a connection like that isn't just rare, it's almost impossible. Most aircraft from that era were dismantled beyond recognition, their parts scattered without documentation, their history fragmented into pieces that could never be fully reassembled. But somehow, this one left a trail. And now they had a question they couldn't ignore. If one part survived, what else was still out there? What followed wasn't a discovery. It was a search, and not an easy one, because every lead came with uncertainty, every record required verification, and every potential match raised more questions than answers, forcing the team to move carefully, methodically, knowing that one mistake could break the entire connection. They searched scrap yards, private collections, forgotten archives, and more than once, they thought they had reached the end. But then something unexpected happened. Another piece surfaced, and then another, each one small on its own. But together, they began forming something much bigger. Not a complete aircraft, but something far more meaningful. A connection that had survived across decades. And that's when the idea changed. Because this was no longer just about restoration. It was about reunion. At 92 years old, James Carter wasn't looking for the past. He had already made peace with it. Or at least, he thought he had. So when he received an invitation to visit what he was told was a small aviation exhibit, there was nothing unusual about it. Nothing that suggested this would be any different from the other events he had attended over the years. But this time, something was different. As he arrived at the hangar, everything felt familiar in a distant way. The open space, the faint smell of metal and oil, the silhouettes of aircraft resting quietly under soft lighting. Yet there was a subtle sense that this visit had been planned with more intention than he realized. He was guided inside, step by step, further than most visitors would go, and then they stopped. In front of him was a large covered structure, and for a moment, no one said anything, because this wasn't just a reveal, it was a question. When the covering was finally pulled back, the engine beneath it didn't look dramatic in the way movies might portray it. There were no flashing lights or exaggerated effects, just a carefully restored piece of machinery, solid, detailed, and undeniably real. But what it represented was something else entirely. At first, James didn't react, not because it didn't matter, but because it mattered too much. Because in that moment, his mind was trying to reconcile something that shouldn't have been possible, something that existed only in memory, suddenly standing in front of him as a physical object. And then, he stepped closer. There's something powerful about touch, because sight can be distant, sound can fade, but touch makes something real. As his hand reached the surface of the engine, there was a shift that didn't need words to be understood, a recognition that went beyond logic, beyond explanation, something instinctive, as if his body remembered what his mind was still trying to process. This wasn't just metal, this was history, his history. And in that moment, everything came back, not as a clear sequence of events, but as fragments, sensations, the hum of engines at altitude, the tension of a mission about to begin, the quiet moments between chaos. For the people watching, it was emotional, but for him, it was something deeper, because this wasn't about nostalgia. It was about connection. What makes moments like this so rare isn't just the difficulty of finding these objects, but the precision required to link them to a specific person, a specific time, a specific story. And in this case, that connection had survived against all odds, carried through decades by something as small and unassuming as a serial number stamped into metal, a detail that could have been ignored, a detail that almost was. And yet, it led here. As he stood there, hand resting on the engine, there was no need for explanation. No need for anyone to describe what had been done or how it had been found, because the significance of the moment existed entirely within the space between memory and reality. And for the first time in nearly 70 years, those two things aligned. He didn't say much. He didn't need to, because some moments aren't meant to be explained, only experienced. The engine itself may have been just one part of a much larger machine, a fragment of something that no longer exists in its original form. Yet in that moment, it felt complete, not because every piece had been restored, but because the connection it represented had been fully realized. And maybe that's what makes this story different, because it isn't about rebuilding the past. It's about rediscovering it, about understanding that even when something seems lost, it isn't always gone. Because sometimes, pieces of history don't disappear. They wait, quietly, unnoticed, until the right moment to come back. And for James Carter, that moment didn't come in the sky, or in the middle of a mission, or even in the years immediately after the war. It came much later, when he least expected it, in the form of an engine, a piece of metal, a forgotten fragment of history that somehow found its way back to him, and in doing so, gave him something no one thought was possible. Not just a memory, but a return. Because for one brief moment, the distance between past and present disappeared. And the machine that once carried him through war was no longer gone. It was right there, in front of him, waiting.